Primaries, Texas elections, and a Texas rep from Austin is under investigation. This is Cassie Pollock, and welcome to Tower Talks. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders win New Hampshire, and now the question people seem to be asking is, what does this mean for each of the two parties? We'll have University Democrat Joseph Trahan in studio with us later to discuss New Hampshire results on the Democratic side of things. And here in Texas, a lot has been happening on the statewide election scale. Senate District 24 currently has 6 candidates competing for the spot, and the campaign has turned into an interesting one, especially when compared to the election that's happening in House District 49, an area that includes UT campus and the West campus. You have a couple polar opposites, and you have the same topics being discussed among all the candidates on all different platforms. All the Senate contenders, 4 of the 6 actually having ties to the health industry, oppose Obama's Affordable Health Care Act and any expansion to Medicaid coverage, while the people running for the House spot all take a more progressive stance and support fully funding Planned Parenthood and expanding Medicaid coverage. A House District 49 forum was held on UT's campus earlier this week, so we'll have a recap on that later. Staying on Texas ledge happenings, State Representative from Austin, Donna Dukes, is under investigation after 2 former staffers came forward and said Dukes directed them to work on state time for a nonprofit that Dukes herself has been involved in for the past 17 years. As reported by the Texas Tribune, Dukes insisted that there was no unlawful work going on. However, shortly after the story broke, one of the same staffers, who, like Duke, graduated from Texas A&M and was in the same sorority, came forward saying that she lived with Dukes in her home at no charge in exchange for taking care of Duke's daughter. Now, there's a couple questions here that will hopefully be answered as the investigation moves forward, like how far is too far with a relationship between a Texas legislator and staffer, and not to mention, to what extent is it acceptable on a moral and legal level to mix personal life with work life. We'll be talking all about this and more after the break, so be sure to stick around. Welcome back to Tower Talks. Here on set with me today, we have our social media and online producer, Katie Keenan, with us. Katie reported on the House District 49 election forum that was held on campus. Let's take a look.
House District 49 of the Texas legislature is up for grabs, and 6 candidates are vying for the chance to represent its citizens, many of which are UT students.
Rent in North Campus, West Campus, Riverside, other parts of town, constantly going up. Every other year it feels like it's another $100 on our lease.
Huey Ray Fisher, UT graduate and former University Democrats president, is a queer Latino who says he's the progressive alternative that can get things done.
Austin Chronicle says I'm the one without the establishment seal of approval. I think it's critical that we see who's financing these campaigns. I'm not the one who's being financed by the same lobbyists who advocated for anti-environmental bills. I'm not the one who loaned myself $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 just to be able to play in this race. I can't afford to do that.
Personal injury attorney and candidate Aspen Dunaway agrees with Fisher.
I think what you're seeing is, and we're having some of it in this campaign, is the campaign's coming down between an establishment inside a group of people that want a low turnout election, that are happy with the status quo, and outsider change candidates like myself that want to grow the electorate, want to get new people in.
Gina Hinojosa, former president of the AISD school board, is poised as the candidate to beat. She views issues such as rent and tuition from a broader perspective.
And to be clear, urban areas all over the country are dealing with unaffordable housing, and rent is a huge part of that. But I do believe the way to tackle that is really through a larger economic justice focus on living wages, student debt, and having the power locally to be able to control for some of those things.
Voting day is March 1st. Katie Keenan, Tower Talks.
So Katie, a couple questions for you. Gina Hinojosa is kind of named as the unofficial person to beat in this race, but then you have people like Huey Ray Fisher, who, I mean, just graduated from this university just, within the past couple of years, and last week was endorsed by University Democrats. What kinds of things stood out to you the most at the forum Monday night?
So there was definitely a distinction between the establishment candidates and non-establishment. Huey definitely falls under that category, so that was a point of discussion. But also, they all pretty much agreed on a lot of policies. Expanding Medicaid was one of them, increasing measures to prohibit sexual assault on campus. Campus carry was another issue. Renting, the prices of renting has gone up. So yeah, that was a big issue, and they all pretty much agreed, like I said, but it was the approach that was kind of nuanced among the candidates.
So basically the approach is kind of what differentiated the establishment candidates from the non-establishment candidates, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I would say so. Huey Ray Fisher was a little more about advocacy and just being loud and being demanding in a way for your rights or for lower prices, or that was a sort of more of a grassroots kind of vibe I was getting from him. Now, when it came to Gina Hinojosa, she's described as more of the establishment candidate. Her father's the chair of the Democratic Party in Texas, so her approach was not so much about advocacy, but probably coming from a broader stance. So, for example, instead of trying to reallocate funds, increasing wages, and fixing the whole student loan issue would help out with the cost of living, and coming from a backseat cycle.
And so you mentioned Gina Hinojosa's ties to the Democratic Party of Texas, and that's kind of what actually ended up sparking a little riff off between her and another candidate who's running for the same seat, Dunaway.
Yes.
So tell us about what happened there. What were some things that were said? Why do you think he attacked her on that issue?
So I think they were trying to be really subtle about it and not get into too many little, mini arguments or anything. For example, Dunaway, whenever he started the whole exchange, he mentioned that Hinojosa is the establishment candidate. She was very insulted by it and took it as a sexist remark, thinking that he was referring to her father, who has these connections, obviously. So none of the other candidates participated in that exchange, but it was a bit heated for a moment, and afterwards he made it very clear that he wasn't trying to be sexist or side one way or the other. It was more so the fact that she was president of the AISD school board, and she has had experience in politics, and it's not completely unfamiliar to her.
I think it's just super interesting how you have kind of what you're seeing at the national, presidential campaign level, establishment versus non-establishment, the outsiders versus the insiders of Washington. So it'll be really interesting to keep following with that race, and of course we'll have you back to talk more about that as the election nears. Moving on to other news, our Tower Talks correspondent Connor Barrick went out to the streets on campus to ask students about how they felt toward women joining the Army. Let's see what they had to say.
This past Saturday at the GOP debate, conversations sparked between Chris Christie, Jeb Bush, Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio about whether women should be drafted into the U.S. military. We went around campus and asked students what they thought. So do you think women should be allowed to be drafted in the U.S. military?
I've really been torn on this question, but I think, yes, they should be allowed to be drafted.
No, I'm an equal opportunity employer, so I think that no one should be drafted in this country. So we don't need an imperialistic U.S. foreign policy. I don't think we need a draft period.
Well, I don't think there should be a draft or mandatory service to begin with, but if there were, then yeah, why not? Gender equality.
The candidate said that, of course, women should be eligible for draft, but Ted Cruz came out and said, no, are you crazy? You shouldn't. Does that change your views on any GOP candidates at all, or?
Other than not liking Ted Cruz very much, probably not.
It makes me like Ted Cruz. I already disliked him, so I guess it keeps my opinion the same on him.
I wouldn't vote for any of the GOP candidates as of now anyway, but if a presidential candidate I were considering voting for said that women should be drafted or shouldn't be, I don't think that would change my opinion of them.
Now we have University Democrat Joseph Trahan joining us here to talk a little bit more about this. So thanks for coming, Joseph.
It's always good to come.
So basically what happened here was Saturday night you had some of the GOP contenders at the debate say that, hey, if a draft were to be implemented again, women could be drafted. You know, women would very well be drafted. Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Chris Christie. And then following that, Ted Cruz was like, oh, wait, y'all are nuts. No, that wouldn't be a thing that happened. So I want your takes on it, and I'm going to start with you, Joseph.
Well, I've always been an advocate for women to be involved, not only in military, but in law enforcement. And I believe that if there are women out there that would like to take part in the military, I think they should be able to. And to extend from that, when it comes to the draft, I do believe that both men and women should serve in some capacity in the military.
What are your thoughts on that?
I would say the same, and my reasoning for it would be that recently combat roles were open to women. So because they have the capacity to be able to serve in that sense, they should be able to also be drafted. So I think, I mean, that's just kind of the logical way to view it. But I have a question for you, actually. If women weren't allowed to serve in combat roles, do you think a draft would still be sensible?
I believe that it would be sensible because there are other roles that can be taken on besides just combat roles. I mean, there are situations that are involved in communications. You have people who are mechanics, people that work on different vehicles and weaponry. So I think that they can contribute in a positive way toward whatever goal we have with foreign policy.
Okay.
Sorry, do you have something?
I have another question.
Okay,
So
yeah.
my
Go
other
ahead.
question is, so there are different requirements for serving in different roles in the military. Should the requirements for women be the same?
I believe that that would definitely have to be, I mean, there's a lot more involved with that just because scientifically speaking, I mean, there are, like for example, men tend to have more muscle growth when it comes to puberty and things like that, and I think in their developmental stages. But that's not to say that women still can't do the job. It's just I do think it is quite difficult to try and expect them to be able to do the same things as men, not necessarily because they're not equal, but because they have different abilities, some better
Physiological
than others.
capabilities. Okay.
So that's obviously a really good conversation that we're having on both sides here. Do you think it's going to help or hurt Cruz and other contenders for kind of coming out and taking a stance on this? You know, Cruz obviously with maybe the quote older-fashioned stance on, hey, yeah, y'all are nuts for thinking that, and then these other candidates, arguably more establishment, you know, not as conservative. What do you think that's going to play, you know, affect everything?
Do you want to go ahead and take that, or?
I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference as when it comes to whether or not someone's going to support them. I think at this time, if they have supporters, I don't think that one issue, especially saying whether or not women should be involved.
That's not the
that.
deal breaker.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think if anything, it would cause Cruz's evangelical base to agree with him and to support him even more. As for the general electorate, I mean, like you said, it's not going to be a deal breaker, but I think it would just kind of not sit well with some voters.
Well, both great points from you guys, and we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll have Joseph stick around to discuss the New Hampshire primary. Stay tuned. Tower Talks. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump swept the New Hampshire primary last night. Trump took a victory with 35.3% of the vote, which is more than double the percent runner-up John Kasich received. Kasich totaled with 16%, while Cruz, Bush, and Rubio's final results stood close to one another. Chris Christie finished in last place last night, and he suspended his campaign for the presidential nomination earlier today, only moments after Carly Fiorina announced her suspension as well. Back with me on set, we have Joseph Trahan with us to talk more about last night's primary. So, you're a University Democrat and a Hillary supporter, correct?
That's correct.
On the record, okay. Clinton had a narrow victory in Iowa to begin with, and she lost New Hampshire last night. You know, we have upcoming states, South Carolina, Nevada, and then we have Super Tuesday. So what do you think needs to happen on the Clinton side of things to kind of get the momentum going back her way and to see herself, do well in those states?
I think that Hillary Clinton needs to address specifics when it comes to Bernie Sanders' campaign, to try and sift through, well, who's more idealistic than the other one, but actually try and bring about real questions about how exactly Bernie Sanders plans on getting a number of his policies and plans implemented at a Congress that is what he considers to be establishment and has been highly critical of. So I think that by bringing that dynamic in, I think that would bring things into perspective that would be beneficial for Hillary Clinton.
So I want your personal take on why Sanders is winning right now. Why he's in the, you have kind of this angry outside of the establishment sort of base. That's, you could argue is also driving Donald Trump as the front runner in the Republican Party. But on the Democratic side, why is Sanders winning? Why is he appealing to so many people from such a wide base, blasting Hillary in, New Hampshire, almost beating her in Iowa, having him up in all the polls, his fundraising. He beat Hillary in January in terms of fundraising. What's to account for that?
I think that Bernie Sanders has really enticed the interest of a lot of people who have been very apathetic to voting and the presidential election process for a number of years, specifically millennials. He's brought about a number of issues that would be in millennials' best interest in terms of taxation changes, trying to restructure student loan programs with an overall goal of obliterating the cost of tuition and fees to attend schools. He's been very supportive of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So a lot of issues that he's bringing about that he supports or is an advocate of that are really appealing to a large base of people who feel disenfranchised.
Okay, so we also kind of in recent weeks have heard about Michael Bloomberg possibly throwing his hat into the ring as an independent. Do you think that that's personally going to happen?
I don't think so.
No, and
No.
just too late in the game at this point?
I would agree, and also with Bloomberg has had a close relationship with Hillary Clinton in the past, a good working relationship and a personal relationship, and I don't think he would want to do anything to jeopardize her campaign. I think that he would have likely, I think he said that just to try and say that, if Sanders continues to gain momentum, that he would feel, in a sense, obligated to try and at least run for president. So.
I gotcha. One last question for you. Let's say that Hillary doesn't get the nomination. Just speaking hypothetically here, would you put your vote for Sanders?
Well, earlier I jokingly said that I would support Donald Trump, but jokes aside, I would decide to support Bernie Sanders simply because though I don't support him now, he still upholds a number of values that coincide with my own, and I think he's doing a very good job of maintaining a very educational conversation about what needs to be done in this country, and I think he's the best choice if that were to happen.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Joseph, and when we come back, we will have our top social media trend of the day, so stay tuned for more Tower Talks. Welcome back to Tower Talks. Social media has been buzzing about a Texas State student nearly naked on campus to make an artistic statement towards sexual assault. Fine arts student Monica Rostvolt previously sparked attention last April after sitting on the library steps wearing nothing but a nude thong, red blindfold, and panties. Students posted photos of her as she laid on a lunch table with Chick-fil-A fries and ketchup all over her body. Her performance caught the eyes of everyone around the world, and some were supportive of her artistic approach, while others expressed confusion. So I would love your thoughts on that. Tweet us, email us, let us know what you want to see covered here on the show. And that's a wrap for today's show. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and tweet us what you want to see. And also, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your evening.